From bridge to bridge, Paul Hogan's philosophy of building connections. In the extraordinary life of Paul Hogan, there exists a profound metaphor that connects every triumph, every relationship, and every moment of cultural impact he achieved: the bridge. From his early days as a rigger on the Sydney Harbour Bridge to his role as the ultimate cultural bridge builder between Australia and the world, Paul's entire existence has been defined by his unique ability to create connections where none existed before. This is the inspiring story of how a working-class bridge worker developed a philosophy of human connection that would transform not just his own life, but the way two nations saw each other and themselves. It's about understanding that every meaningful relationship, every successful collaboration, and every moment of genuine communication requires the same skills that build physical bridges: careful planning, strong foundations, attention to detail, and absolute commitment to creating something that will stand that test of time. But Paul's bridge building went far beyond the professional realm to encompass a complete worldview about how human beings can overcome differences, build trust across cultural divides, and create lasting connections that enrich everyone involved. From his marriage partnerships to his creative collaborations, from his mentorship relationships to his role as Australia's unofficial cultural ambassador, Paul consistently applied the principles he learned as a bridge worker to the challenge of connecting hearts and minds. Most remarkably, this philosophy emerged not from academic study or professional training, but from the practical wisdom of someone who spent his formative years literally building structures that connected separate places into unified system. The lessons he learned about engineering, teamwork, and the importance of every individual component would become the foundation for a life dedicated to building bridges between people, cultures, and ideas that seemed impossibly far apart. This is the uplifting exploration of how one man's understanding of what it means to build something lasting and meaningful became a template for creating connections that transcended entertainment, politics, and cultural barriers to touch the fundamental human need for understanding, respect, and authentic community. Chapter 1: The Foundation of Understanding. Paul Hogan's education in bridge building began not in classrooms or textbooks, but on the wind-swept heights of Sydney Harbour, where he spent his formative adult years as a rigger working on the construction and maintenance of one of the world's most iconic bridges. This physical experience of literally connecting two sides of a great harbor would become the template for everything meaningful he would accomplish in his life. Before I got into television and entertainment, working as a bridge rigger was a huge advantage because it gave me a perspective. God Almighty, I was scraping to pay the rent when I was 30. Paul reflected years later, but this financial struggle was only one small part of the education he received during those crucial years on the bridge. The real education was about understanding how separate things could become unified through careful planning, skilled execution, and absolute commitment to creating something that would endure. Working on the Sydney Harbour Bridge taught Paul fundamental lessons about the importance of strong foundation. In bridge construction, no amount of beautiful superstructure can compensate for weak foundations, and Paul learned to recognize that the same principle applied to relationships, creative partnerships, and cultural connection. Before any meaningful bridge could be built between people, there had to be a solid foundation of mutual respect, honest communication, and shared commitment to the project's success. The teamwork required for bridge construction provided Paul with an early understanding of how individual talents could be coordinated to create something far greater than any single person could achieve alone. Every rigger, every engineer, every supervisor had essential skills that contributed to the project's success, and Paul learned that effective bridge building required recognizing and utilizing everyone's strengths while compensating for individual weaknesses through collective effort. You imagine the courage it took for him to climb off the bridge, go on that show. Observers noted about Paul's transition from bridge work to television, but this transition was actually a natural progression rather than a radical career change. Paul was simply moving from building physical bridges to building cultural bridges, applying the same skills and principles to a different type of construction project. The precision required for bridge work taught Paul the importance of attention to detail in all meaningful construction projects. A single poorly placed rivet could compromise an entire structure's integrity, and Paul learned to apply this same meticulousness to his creative work, his relationships, and his cultural bridge-building effort. Whether he was crafting a comedy sketch or navigating cross-cultural collaboration, Paul understood that small details could make the difference between success and failure. The long-term perspective required for bridge construction influenced Paul's approach to all his future projects. Bridges are not built for immediate gratification but for decades or centuries of service, and Paul learned to think beyond immediate results to consider how his work would serve future generations. This perspective would later influence his approach to cultural representation, ensuring that his work created lasting positive impressions rather than short-term entertainment value. The problem-solving skills developed through bridge work prepared Paul for the complex challenges he would face in entertainment and cultural diplomacy. Bridge construction requires constant adaptation to changing conditions, weather, materials, technical problems, and Paul learned to approach obstacles as puzzles to be solved rather than barriers that could not be overcome. The understanding of structural engineering that Paul gained from bridge work gave him insight into how complex systems function and what makes them stable or unstable. This knowledge would later inform his understanding of cultural dynamics, helping him recognize how different elements of cross-cultural communication could be arranged to create stability and mutual understanding rather than conflict and misunderstanding. Perhaps most importantly, Paul's experience as a bridge worker taught him that the most beautiful and effective bridges are those that appear effortless and natural, even though they require enormous skill and planning to achieve. This lesson would become central to his entertainment philosophy. The best cultural bridge building looks easy and spontaneous, but it actually requires deep understanding of both sides being connected and careful attention to creating authentic rather than artificial connections. Satisfaction of completing bridge work, seeing separate places become connected and watching people use those connections to improve their lives, gave Paul a template for measuring success that went far beyond personal achievement to include service to others and contribution to community well-being. Chapter 2: Building the First Cultural Bridge. Paul Hogan's transition from physical bridge construction to cultural bridge building began with The Paul Hogan Show, a television program that would prove to be his first major project in connecting different types of people and creating shared understanding across social and cultural divides. This show became the prototype for all his future bridge building work, establishing the principles and techniques he would use throughout his career. What they were asking Australians to do was to be themselves and to not be ashamed of who they were, observed those who understood the deeper purpose behind Paul's television work. The Paul Hogan Show wasn't just entertainment, it was an ambitious bridge-building project designed to connect ordinary Australians with their own cultural identity while simultaneously building bridges between different social classes, generations and regional communities within Australia. We had cut the umbilical cord to England by then, or well, they did. They had a big role in sharpening the blade to cut the cord because the Aussies were kind of cringing at our identity a bit. You know, we didn't have much national pride back in the early 70s, reflecting the cultural landscape that Paul and John Cornell were working to transform through their bridge-building approach to television programming. The show's format itself was designed as a bridge between different types of content and audiences. Even the newsreaders spoke with a clipped British accent. I remember. And so out comes Hog. Good day, viewers. Demonstrating how Paul served as a bridge between formal institutional communication and authentic Australian expression, creating connections between official information and popular understanding. Paul's approach to comedy on the show was fundamentally about building bridges between different perspectives, rather than creating divisions through humor that relied on putting people down. There was no malice in it usually. The butt of the joke ended up being me. Paul noted about his comedic philosophy, showing how he used self-deprecating humor as a bridge-building tool that brought people together through shared laughter rather than separating them through mockery of others. The characters Paul created for the show served as bridges between different Australian communities and experiences. Each character represented a recognizable type of Australian person, but Paul's portrayal was always affectionate and respectful, creating connections between urban and rural audiences, different generations, and various social backgrounds by showing the shared humanity and humor that united all Australians. And he did it with such naturalness and humility and affection that nobody took offense to. It was like, yeah, we should have a voice, and yeah, That's how we sound when we use that voice. We're Australian, capturing how Paul's bridge-building approach to television programming succeeded in creating unity rather than division, bringing Australians together around shared identity rather than separating them through elitist or exclusionary content. The show's treatment of social issues demonstrated Paul's understanding of how cultural bridges could be built through honest but non-threatening communication. Rather than lecturing or preaching, Paul used humor and common sense to create bridges between different viewpoints, helping audiences understand various perspectives without feeling attacked or dismissed for their own belief. It wasn't political, but it was patriotic, noted collaborators about the show's approach, demonstrating how Paul's bridge-building philosophy transcended political divisions to focus on the shared values and experiences that united Australians regardless of their political affiliation. This approach created bridges across the political spectrum while building stronger connections to Australian identity. The international recognition that the Paul Hogan Show received proved that effective cultural bridge building could extend far beyond its original target audience. The show's ability to represent authentic Australian culture in ways that international audiences could understand and appreciate demonstrated Paul's skill in building bridges between cultures without sacrificing the authenticity that made the content meaningful to its primary audience. The collaborative approach that characterized the show's production exemplified Paul's bridge-building philosophy in practice. Rather than dominating the creative process, Paul worked to create bridges between different talents and perspectives within his production team, ensuring that the final product reflected collective wisdom rather than individual ego. The lasting impact of the Paul Hogan Show on Australian television and culture demonstrated the power of intentional bridge building to create positive change that extends far beyond immediate entertainment value. The show's influence on how Australians saw themselves and how they were willing to express their cultural identity created foundations for future cultural bridge building projects that would have international significance. The skills Paul developed through this television bridge-building project, understanding audiences, creating authentic content, building collaborative relationships, and maintaining respect for all parties involved, would become essential tools for the even more ambitious cultural bridge-building projects that would define his international career and cultural legacy. Chapter 3. The Art of Cross-Cultural Connection. Paul Hogan's most ambitious and successful bridge-building project came with the creation of Crocodile Dundee, a film that demonstrated his mastery of connecting vastly different cultures through authentic storytelling, respectful character development, and universal themes that transcended cultural boundaries while celebrating the unique qualities that made each culture valuable and interesting. The genesis of the Crocodile Dundee character revealed Paul's sophisticated understanding of bridge-building psychology. Paul was walking back through a very crowded New York street at peak hour and being jostled and people everywhere, and he felt like a real hick. And he was thinking to himself, you know, if I feel like a hick, imagine how Barney, who lives down the road, feels like. How would he feel? Or even better, a bloke from the outback, demonstrating how Paul's bridge-building approach began with empathy and understanding of how different people might experience cultural displacement. By the time he got to his room, he had a story formulated, and that was an outline for a script. He expanded on the idea of the fish out of water concept to this outback bloke who ends up in New York City, showing how Paul's bridge-building philosophy transformed a potentially alienating experience into an opportunity for creating connections between vastly different cultural worlds through storytelling that honored both perspectives. The character of Mick Dundee was specifically designed as a bridge between Australian and American culture, rather than creating a character who was superior to American culture or dismissive of urban sophistication. Paul crafted someone who was genuinely curious, respectful, and eager to understand different ways of living while maintaining pride in his own cultural background and values. When we acted together, everything felt so natural that I forgot I was in front of a camera. Paul's humor and warmth made me feel truly safe, Linda Kozlowski reflected about working with Paul, demonstrating how his bridge-building approach extended to creating safe spaces for cross-cultural collaboration, where all participants could contribute their authentic selves without fear of ridicule or dismissal. The film's treatment of cultural differences exemplified Paul's bridge-building philosophy in practice. Rather than emphasizing conflict or incompatibility between Australian and American cultures, characters, the movie focused on moments of connection, mutual learning, and genuine appreciation for the strengths and unique qualities that each culture brought to human interaction. Paul's approach to depicting American characters in the film showed his understanding that effective bridge building requires respectful representation of all parties involved. American characters were not portrayed as inferior or ridiculous, but as people with their own valuable perspectives and experiences who could benefit from exposure to different ways of thinking and living. The humor in Crocodile Dundee served as a bridge-building tool rather than a weapon for cultural superiority. The comedy emerged from misunderstandings and different perspectives, but it was always presented in ways that brought characters closer together rather than emphasizing unbridgeable differences or cultural incompatibility. I just got bored of writing sketch. I'd like to do something that lasts longer. Paul noted about his motivation for creating the film, revealing his bridge-building philosophy's emphasis on creating lasting connections rather than temporary entertainment that would be quickly forgotten without contributing to ongoing cultural understanding. The international success of Crocodile Dundee proved that authentic cultural bridge-building could achieve both artistic and commercial success. The film's ability to appeal to audiences worldwide while maintaining its authentic Australian character demonstrated that cultural specificity and universal appeal were not contradictory but could actually reinforce each other when approached with skill and respect. The film's impact on tourism and cultural exchange revealed the practical benefits of successful cultural bridge building. By creating positive, authentic representations of Australian culture that international audiences could understand and appreciate, Paul's work generated real economic and cultural benefits for Australia, while fostering genuine international goodwill and interest. The shrimp on the Barbie tourism ads are the single best tourism campaign Australia has ever done to this day, and I think they established the Australian character on the international stage, demonstrating how Paul's bridge-building work extended beyond entertainment to include cultural diplomacy and economic development that benefited his entire nation. The collaborative international production process for Crocodile Dundee provided Paul with opportunities to practice bridge building on a practical level, working with American investors, international distributor, and cross-cultural production teams to create something that served everyone's interests while maintaining artistic integrity and cultural authenticity. Chapter 4: Personal Bridges, Love, Marriage, and Family Connections. Paul Hogan's approach to bridge building extended beyond his professional work to encompass his most intimate relationships, where he applied the same principles of careful construction, mutual respect, and long-term commitment that characterized his career success. His marriages and family relationships revealed both the potential and the challenges of applying bridge-building philosophy to personal connections that require different skills than professional collaboration. Together they weathered life's hardship, building a simple home and raising 5 children. Describing Paul's first marriage to Noeline Edwards, which represented his initial attempt to build a lasting personal bridge based on shared struggle, mutual support, and commitment to family goals that transcended individual ambitions and provided stability for long-term relationship construction. The foundation that Paul and Noeline built together during their early years demonstrated his understanding that strong personal bridges require solid groundwork based on shared values, mutual sacrifice, and commitment to collective success, rather than individual achievement. Their partnership during Paul's transition from bridge worker to entertainer showed how personal bridges could provide the stability necessary for professional risk-taking and career development. He maintained a very normal household, as did Noeline, and so even though Noeline would love to go to the lodges and all the special events, they didn't seek the limelight. It was more about family, noted observers about Paul's commitment to maintaining the family bridge that had supported his rise to success, demonstrating his understanding that personal bridges require ongoing maintenance and attention rather than taking care of themselves automatically. Paul's relationship with his children from his first marriage represented another type of bridge-building challenge, as he worked to maintain connections across generational differences, changing life circumstances, and the complications created by his public career and personal decision. And they've always all had very real jobs, and showbiz has been this crazy thing Dad does from time to time, suggesting that these family bridges succeeded in creating stability and grounded values despite the unusual circumstances of celebrity family life. The second major personal bridge Paul attempted to build was his marriage to Linda Kozlowski, which began with the powerful connection they established while working together on Crocodile Dundee. I knew I was in trouble from the moment I laid eyes on her. Linda was smart, beautiful, utterly irresistible. Paul admitted, revealing how personal bridges can sometimes begin with immediate attraction rather than gradual construction, creating both opportunities and challenges for long-term relationship building. Linda, too, couldn't hide her feelings for the rugged, witty man. In a later interview, she confessed, "When we acted together, everything felt so natural that I forgot I was in front of a camera." Paul's humor and warmth made me feel truly safe, demonstrating how effective personal bridge building creates environments where both parties can be authentic and vulnerable without fear of judgment or rejection. The marriage between Paul and Linda represented an attempt to build a bridge between different cultural backgrounds, life experiences, and professional goals. Their 23-year relationship showed both the potential for cross-cultural personal bridges and the challenges that arise when different expectations and values create structural stresses that require ongoing attention and adaptation. Despite Paul's efforts to make up for the past, the distance between him and his children only grew wider, revealing how the construction of new personal bridges can sometimes damage existing relationships if not carefully managed. Paul's experience demonstrated the complex engineering required to maintain multiple personal bridges simultaneously without compromising the integrity of any individual connection. Paul's relationship with his son Chance represented his opportunity to apply lessons learned from previous bridge-building experiences to create a more successful personal connection. "I got custody, which I want." Paul's son Chance, "He's great, he's very funny, sense of humor, he's a great kid," showing how Paul's later approach to personal bridge building emphasized presence, shared experiences, and mutual respect rather than material provision or external achievement. The father and son often spend time together, sharing simple everyday moments, demonstrating Paul's evolved understanding that strong personal bridges are built through consistent, authentic interaction rather than grand gestures or extraordinary experiences. This approach reflected his bridge worker understanding that structural integrity comes from attention to daily maintenance rather than dramatic intervention. The challenges Paul faced in maintaining his personal bridges while managing his professional responsibilities illustrated the complexity of bridge building when multiple structures must be maintained simultaneously. His experience showed how success in one area of bridge building could create pressures that threatened other important connections if not carefully balanced. "I still see her because we've got a son between us." Paul noted about his continuing relationship with Linda after their divorce, demonstrating how effective bridge builders can maintain functional connections even after major structural changes to their relationship. This approach reflected his understanding that bridge maintenance sometimes requires adapting to new circumstances rather than attempting to preserve original designs that no longer serve their intended purposes. The lessons Paul learned from his personal bridge building experiences about the importance of consistent maintenance, the need for adaptation to changing circumstances, and the value of authentic communication influenced his approach to all other relationships and provided practical wisdom that enhanced his professional bridge-building capability. Chapter 5: Building Bridges Through Mentorship. Paul Hogan's evolution from bridge-building beneficiary to bridge-building teacher represents one of the most meaningful aspects of his legacy, as he transformed his hard-earned wisdom about connection and collaboration into opportunities for others to develop their own bridge-building capability. His mentorship philosophy reflected the same principles he had learned as a physical bridge worker, that strong structures require multiple interconnected components, each contributing their unique strengths to the collective project. I, like everyone else, used to watch the Paul Hogan show. I think I was like 7 or something when it started and was always just a huge fan. Dean Murphy recalled about his childhood connection to Paul's work, demonstrating how cultural bridges can span generations and inspire future bridge builders to pursue their own connection-building project. Paul's approach to mentorship was fundamentally about bridge building rather than traditional teaching. Rather than imposing his methods on emerging talent, He worked to understand their unique perspectives and capabilities, then helped them build bridges between their authentic voices and audience expectations. I met him and he was such a low-key, easy, gallant sort of guy, and I thought, yeah, I could work with this guy, it'll be no problem. Dean Murphy noted about Paul's collaborative approach to mentorship relationship. I think the great thing about the movies that he made with Dean Murphy was that Paul Hogan had then gotten a little bit older and he played roles that were age appropriate. And he also played Australian men, and he was back in Australia, and that's why those movies work. Demonstrating how Paul's mentorship created bridges between different career phases and life circumstances, rather than attempting to recreate past successes through outdated formula. Paul's mentorship of Shane Jacobson on Charlie and Boots exemplified his bridge-building approach to intergenerational collaboration. Then he came up with Charlie and Boots with Shane Jacobson, who I'd met before, another lovely bloke, and I thought, yeah, I could go and shoot maybe one of these, it'll be fun, showing how Paul created bridges between established and emerging talent through projects that served both parties' interests and creative goals. The father-son relationship portrayed in Charlie and Boots became a vehicle for exploring real-life bridge building between different generations and life experiences. Do you remember when I was little, Dad promised me that one day we could go to the northernmost tip of Australia? Well, we're doing it. Representing how the film's narrative served as a metaphor for the mentorship process itself. Older and younger generations building connections through shared experiences and mutual respect. I find that great hunk of spunk you all with my dad. It had mastered his sense of timing and comedy. He's the thing that people are drawn to, and that's what works on screen, Shane Jacobson observed about working with Paul, demonstrating how effective mentorship creates bridges between different performance styles and comedic sensibilities while allowing each participant to maintain their authentic voice and approach. Paul's mentorship philosophy emphasized practical experience over theoretical instruction, reflecting his bridge worker understanding that meaningful skills are developed through hands-on collaboration rather than abstract teaching. His protégés learned by working alongside him on real projects with genuine stakes and authentic creative challenges. The networking effects of Paul's mentorship demonstrated how individual bridge-building relationships could create larger structures of mutual support and collaboration. People who worked with Paul often maintained connections with each other, creating networks of relationships that continued to generate new opportunities and collaborative projects long after their initial mentorship experiences. Paul's willingness to share not just his creative techniques but also his industry connections and business relationships reflected his understanding that effective mentorship requires building bridges to resources and opportunities rather than just providing artistic guidance. He used his established relationships to create pathways for emerging talent that might have taken years to develop independently. He's got a knife. That's not a knife, that's a knife. Became not just a famous movie quote, but a metaphor for Paul's mentorship approach, helping others understand the difference between amateur efforts and professional level work, while providing practical guidance about how to develop the skills necessary for sustained success. The long-term relationships that developed from Paul's mentorship efforts proved that his bridge-building approach created lasting connections rather than temporary collaboration. People who worked with Paul often remained in contact for decades, continuing to seek his advice and support while providing their own assistance as their careers developed and they gained their own resources and expertise. The cultural impact of Paul's mentorship extended beyond individual career development to include broader influence on Australian entertainment industry values and practices. His collaborative, respectful approach to working with emerging talent helped establish norms of mutual support and shared success that influenced how other established figures approached their own mentorship opportunity. Chapter 6: Diplomatic Bridges. Australia and the World. Paul Hogan's role as an unofficial cultural ambassador represented perhaps his most significant bridge-building achievement, as he used his international platform to create lasting connections between Australia and the global community that transcended entertainment to include tourism, cultural exchange, and international goodwill that continues to benefit his homeland decades after his peak celebrity year. The tourism ads came about because John and Paul were walking past Australia House in London and saw a picture picture of a koala that was our poster campaign for tourism and were a bit disappointed and thought they could do a much better job, revealing how Paul's diplomatic bridge building began with recognition that existing representations of Australia were inadequate for creating genuine international understanding and attraction. Come on, come and say good day. I'll slip an extra shrimp on the Barbie for you. The shrimp on the Barbie tourism ads are the single best tourism campaign Australia has ever done to this day. And I think they established the Australian character on the international stage, demonstrating how Paul's approach to cultural diplomacy emphasized authentic invitation rather than artificial marketing, creating bridges based on genuine hospitality rather than commercial manipulation. The deal structure that John Cornell negotiated for the tourism campaign reflected Paul's bridge-building philosophy in practice. The deal that John made for those commercials was not that John be paid or Paul be paid, but was that they put the highest production quality into the commercials and that they prime-time television in America, showing how effective diplomatic bridge building sometimes requires personal sacrifice for collective benefit. Paul's representation of Australia in the tourism campaign was carefully calibrated to create accurate rather than exaggerated impressions of Australian culture. Rather than relying on stereotypes or caricatures, he presented himself as authentically Australian while remaining accessible and appealing to international audiences who might have no previous knowledge of Australian culture or values. Actually, I did the survey and did 10 countries and asked what they knew about Australia. It was a famous Australian and it was Mick Dundee. Paul noted years later about the lasting impact of his cultural bridge-building work, demonstrating how effective diplomatic representation could create cultural awareness that persisted for decades and influenced how entire nations were perceived internationally. The success of Crocodile Dundee as cultural diplomacy went far beyond box office receipts to include measurable impact on international tourism, cultural exchange, and Australia's reputation as a travel destination. It was certainly in John's mind that the way to get a movie up in America would be for people to recognize Paul Hogan's face, but the results exceeded commercial goals to include genuine cultural bridge building that benefited Australia's international relationship. Paul's approach to cultural representation balanced pride in Australian distinctiveness with recognition of universal human values that could create connections across cultural boundaries. His characters were recognizably Australian but never exclusionary or dismissive of other cultures, creating bridges rather than barriers between different national identities. We became proud to be fair dinkum Aussies after Paul Hogan. Before that, there was this terrible cultural cringe, and we were the antipodean rejects and we're not living in the real world. Observers noted about Paul's impact on Australian cultural confidence, demonstrating how effective diplomatic bridge building can strengthen the home culture while building international connection. The international recognition that Paul brought to Australia created economic opportunities that extended far beyond his individual career to benefit the entire Australian entertainment industry, tourism sector, and cultural export capability. His bridge-building work created pathways that other Australian entertainers and cultural figures could use to develop their own international relationships and career opportunity. Paul's continued role as cultural bridge builder was evident in his 2018 participation in the Tourism Australia campaign that went viral internationally. Paul, in talking about it, he'd go, "The character is like 35 years old," reflecting his understanding that effective cultural representation required adaptation to changing circumstances while maintaining authentic connection to core Australian values and identity. The diplomatic bridges that Paul built between Australia and international audiences proved durable enough to survive personal controversies and career challenges. Even during his most difficult periods, international audiences maintained affection for the cultural connections he had helped create, demonstrating the lasting value of authentic rather than superficial cultural bridge building. Paul's legacy as cultural ambassador influenced how subsequent Australian entertainers approached international career development, establishing expectations that successful Australian figures would use their platforms to build bridges that benefited their homeland, rather than simply pursuing individual career advancement. This model of cultural responsibility became part of the template for Australian entertainment success. The diplomatic impact of Paul's bridge-building work continues to influence Australia's international relationships and cultural standing, proving that authentic cultural representation by skilled bridge builders can create lasting benefits that extend far beyond entertainment industry success to include genuine contributions to national prosperity and international understanding. Chapter 7. The engineering of authentic communication. Throughout his career, Paul Hogan demonstrated an intuitive understanding of communication engineering that paralleled his knowledge of physical bridge construction, applying principles of structural integrity, load distribution, and environmental adaptation to the challenge of creating authentic connections between different types of people across various media platforms and cultural contexts. Paul's approach to comedy reflected his bridge-building philosophy and its emphasis on connection rather than division. There was no malice in it usually. The butt of the joke ended up being me, he noted about his comedic style, demonstrating how authentic communication engineering requires accepting vulnerability as the price for creating genuine connections with audiences who might otherwise feel threatened or excluded by humor that targets them. The timing and delivery techniques that made Paul's comedy so effective were based on his understanding of how to build bridges between performer and audience through carefully calibrated communication that respected both parties' intelligence while acknowledging their different perspectives, experiences. His comedy created shared understanding rather than emphasizing differences or superiority. He did it with such naturalness and humility and affection that nobody took offense to it. It was like, yeah, we should have a voice, and yeah, that's how we sound when we use that voice. We're Australian, capturing how Paul's communication engineering succeeded in creating authentic connections by validating audiences' own experiences rather than imposing external standards or artificial persona. Paul's character development process reflected his bridge-building understanding of how to create authentic representation that could serve multiple functions simultaneously. His characters were recognizable to Australian audiences but accessible to international viewers, politically neutral but culturally specific, entertaining but respectful of the real people they represented. The collaborative communication style that characterized Paul's best work demonstrated his understanding that authentic connection requires genuine dialogue rather than one-way performance. Whether working with fellow performers, production teams, or international partners, Paul created communication environments where all participants could contribute their authentic perspectives and capabilities. It was tremendously creatively collaborative, and I think that really added a spark to our relationship, noted Delvine Delaney about working with John Cornell, describing the kind of communication engineering that Paul both participated in and facilitated throughout his career, creating spaces where different talents and perspectives could combine to produce results that exceeded what any individual could achieve alone. Paul's adaptation of his communication style to different media platforms and cultural contexts showed his sophisticated understanding of how authentic connection required attention to environmental factors that affected how messages were received and interpreted. His approach to television, film, and live performance reflected this adaptability while maintaining core authenticity. The longevity of Paul's cultural impact demonstrated the structural integrity of his communication engineer. Decades after his peak celebrity years, international audiences still recognize and appreciate the cultural bridges he built, proving that authentic communication creates lasting connections rather than temporary entertainment that is quickly forgotten. What they were asking Australians to do was to be themselves and to not be ashamed of who they were, revealing the deeper purpose behind Paul's communication engineering, not just entertaining audiences but empowering them to develop their own authentic voices and cultural confidence that could support their own bridge-building effort.
Paul's ability to maintain authentic communication across different career phases and life circumstances reflected his understanding that effective bridge building requires adaptation to changing conditions while preserving core structural principles. His later work with Dean Murphy and Shane Jacobson demonstrated this adaptive capability in practice. The mentorship dimension of Paul's communication engineering showed how effective bridge builders could transmit their skills to others through modeling and collaborative practice rather than formal instruction. His protégés learned communication techniques by participating in authentic creative projects rather than through abstract teaching methods. And he doesn't like it. Yeah, it did make me angry, never depressed me.
but it made me angry. I wanted to thump somebody, so I haven't really got it out of my system yet. Paul's honest admission about his continuing frustration with betrayals and setbacks demonstrated his commitment to authentic communication, even when it revealed personal struggles rather than maintaining artificial personas that might seem more professional or impressive. The international translation of Paul's communication style proved that authentic bridge building could transcend language and cultural barriers when based on genuine respect for universal human experiences and emotions rather than relying on cultural specificity that excluded or alienated potential audience members. Paul's evolution as a communicator reflected his understanding that effective bridge building required continuous learning and adaptation rather than relying on formulas or techniques that had succeeded in the past. His willingness to adjust his approach while maintaining authentic core values demonstrated mature understanding of communication engineering principles. Chapter 8: Legacy Bridges: Connecting Past, Present, and Future. As Paul Hogan's active career winds down, his most enduring bridge-building achievement may be the way he has connected different eras of Australian culture and creating pathways between past traditions and future possibilities that continue to serve emerging artists and cultural figures who build upon the foundations he established. The shrimp on the Barbie tourism ads are the single best tourism campaign Australia has ever done to this day, demonstrating how effective cultural bridge building can create lasting impact that serves future generations long after its original creators have moved on to other projects or retirement. Paul's work continues to benefit Australia's international reputation and tourism industry decades after its creation. The mentorship relationships that Paul developed throughout his career have created networks of professional and personal connections that continue to generate new opportunities and collaborative projects for multiple generations of Australian entertainers. Dean Murphy, Shane Jacobson, and others who worked with Paul have become bridge builders themselves, extending his influence into new creative territories. I think eventually he will come back to Australia for sure. I think this is home. He's always been home for him, reflecting Paul's understanding that the most meaningful bridges are those that connect people to their roots and authentic identities rather than encouraging them to abandon their origins for external success or approval. Paul's approach to aging and career transition has provided a template for how entertainment figures can maintain relevance and purpose throughout different life stages by adapting their bridge-building capabilities to changing circumstances rather than attempting to preserve past glories through repetition or nostalgia. The cultural confidence that Paul helped establish through his international success created space for subsequent Australian entertainers to pursue global careers while maintaining authentic connections to their homeland. His bridge-building work established expectations that Australian cultural figures could succeed internationally without sacrificing their cultural identity or values. Before that, there was this terrible cultural cringe and we were the Antipodean rejects, and we're not living in the real world. But Paul's success in building bridges between Australian and international culture helped to overcome this limiting mindset, creating possibilities for future generations that might not have existed without his pioneering work in cultural bridge building. The business models that Paul and John Cornell developed for independent film production and international distribution created templates that other Australian filmmakers could adapt for their own project, demonstrating how effective bridge building includes creating practical pathways that others can use to develop their own cross-cultural connections and career opportunity. Paul's demonstration that authentic cultural representation could achieve commercial success while maintaining artistic integrity influenced how Australian entertainment industry approached international market development, establishing principles that continue to guide successful cross-cultural bridge-building projects in film, television, and other media. The charitable and community work that Paul has supported throughout his career, often without seeking public recognition, reflects his understanding that meaningful bridge building extends beyond professional achievement to include service to community needs and support for people who face challenges in developing their own connections and opportunities. I'm mostly living in America, I want to be over there. Mindfulness on 2 weeks can handle itself. I'll come, here's a girl for you to come with me.
demonstrating Paul's continuing commitment to maintaining bridges between different aspects of his life and identity rather than choosing one location or identity exclusive. The educational impact of Paul's work inspiring young people to pursue careers in entertainment, encouraging cultural pride and confidence, and demonstrating that ordinary backgrounds do not preclude extraordinary achievements, continues to influence new generations of potential bridge builders who see possibilities in his example. Paul's willingness to acknowledge mistakes and learn from failures has provided valuable lessons for others about how to maintain integrity and authenticity while navigating the challenges and temptations that come with success and public recognition. His example demonstrates that effective bridge building requires ongoing commitment to growth rather than assuming past success guarantees future results. The international relationships that Paul developed through his entertainment career have created lasting goodwill between Australia and other nations that extends beyond his individual achievements to benefit ongoing diplomatic, economic, and cultural exchange programs that serve national interests and international understanding. John was egalitarian and he was also values-driven, and he did things for the good of all, and so that's what drove. Describing the philosophy that guided Paul's key partnership and continues to influence how he approaches bridge-building opportunities even in his later years, focusing on collective benefit rather than individual achievement. The preservation of Paul's work through archives, documentary, and continued distribution ensures that future generations will have access to examples of effective cultural bridge building that they can study, adapt, and build upon in their own efforts to create connections across cultural, generational, and geographic boundaries. Epilogue: The Bridge Builder's Eternal Project. As the sun sets over Sydney Harbour, illuminating the steel arch bridge where Paul Hogan once worked as a young rigger, the metaphor that has guided his entire life comes full circle. The boy who learned to build connections between separate places has become a man whose greatest achievement was learning to build connections between separate hearts, minds, and culture. Before I got into television and entertainment, working as a bridge rigger was a huge advantage because it gave me a perspective. Paul reflected, but this perspective became something far more valuable than he could have imagined during those early days on the bridge. It became the foundation for a life dedicated to proving that human beings can overcome any distance, difference, or divide when they approach each other with genuine respect, authentic communication, and patient commitment to building something lasting. The bridges that Paul built, from his early television work that connected Australians to their own cultural identity, to his films that connected Australia to the world, to his mentorship relationships that connected different generations of entertainers, to his personal relationships that connected hearts across cultural and individual differences, all reflect the same fundamental principles he learned as a bridge worker. Start with a strong foundation, pay attention to every detail, work as part of a team, and never forget that the ultimate purpose is to serve others by creating connections that will endure long after the builder has moved on to other projects. We became proud to be fair dinkum Aussies after Paul Hogan, but this cultural transformation was just one result of a bridge-building philosophy that touched every aspect of human connection. Paul demonstrated that the same skills required to connect physical structures could be applied to connecting people, cultures, ideas, and generations in ways that enriched everyone involved while creating value that extended far beyond individual achievement or recognition. The legacy that Paul leaves behind is not just his entertainment achievements or his contribution to Australian culture, but his demonstration that every human interaction is an opportunity for bridge building, and that the most meaningful success comes from using whatever talents and opportunities you possess to create connections that serve others rather than just advancing your own interests. I think this is home. He's always been home for him, but Paul's understanding of home has expanded from a specific geographic location to encompass the entire network of relationships and connections that he has built throughout his life. Home, for a bridge builder, is not a place but a web of authentic connections that provide support, meaning, and purpose regardless of changing external circumstances. The techniques that Paul developed for building cultural bridges, approaching others with curiosity rather than judgment, finding common ground while respecting differences, using humor to create connection rather than division, maintaining authenticity while adapting to different circumstances, and always focusing on what you can give rather than what you can get. provide a template that anyone can adapt to their own bridge-building opportunities and challenges. John was egalitarian, and he was also values-driven, and he did things for the good of all. Describing the partnership philosophy that guided Paul's most successful collaborative relationships and continues to define his approach to using whatever time and energy remain for projects that serve others rather than just protecting his own comfort or legacy. The bridges that Paul built continue to carry traffic long after their construction, connecting people and cultures in ways that generate ongoing benefits for everyone involved. Tourism to Australia, appreciation for Australian culture, confidence among Australian entertainers pursuing international careers, and understanding between different generations of creative professionals all continue to be strengthened by foundations that Paul established decades ago. Perhaps most importantly, Paul's life demonstrates that bridge building is not a profession or a talent limited to special people, but a fundamental human capability that can be developed and applied by anyone willing to invest the patience, skill, and commitment required to create lasting connections rather than temporary achievements. The bridge worker who learned to connect separate places has shown us all how to connect separate lives into shared community, how to build foundations strong enough to support dreams that seemed impossible, and how to create structures of human connection that will continue to serve others long after we have moved on to whatever comes next. As Paul Hogan's remarkable journey nears its completion, the bridges he built remain stronger than ever, continuing to carry the dreams, hopes, and authentic connections that he dedicated his life to creating. The greatest monument to any bridge builder is not the recognition they receive, but the enduring utility of the connections they create for others to use in building their own meaningful lives and relationships. From bridge to bridge, Paul Hogan has given the world a masterclass in the art of human connection, proving that with enough patience, skill, and commitment to serving others, any distance can be spanned, any difference can be overcome, and any separation can be transformed into an opportunity for building something beautiful, lasting, and beneficial to all.